My fingers trembled when I saw that photo on social media. It was me, Helen Santos Oliveira, 72 years old, holding a portrait of my son Edward when he was 5 years old. The gap-toothed smile, the golden curls, the bright little eyes full of love for his mommy. But the woman in the photo was no longer that radiant mother from decades ago. She was a frail, elderly woman in a hospital bed, abandoned, with eyes that told a story of pain that even I didn't know was so visible. Nurse Camila's caption burned on my phone screen. "This is Mrs. Helen. She's been alone in the hospital for days. Her son went traveling. She has no one nearby, but she deserves someone. Someone who sees in her the value that her own blood forgot." 43,000 likes. 12,000 comments, shared by people throughout the United States. Strangers calling me grandma, sending flowers, promising visits, and there I was, in room 407 of St. Luke's Hospital, discovering that I had become an involuntary symbol of elderly abandonment. The humiliation was complete, but something inside me whispered that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a transformation I never imagined possible. I closed my eyes and let the tears roll. No longer tears of self-pity, but of a rage that was finally finding its voice. A rage I had kept for years, decades, buried under layers of unconditional love and maternal self-sacrifice. There, in that moment of maximum exposure, I finally saw the truth. My son had abandoned me at the first opportunity, and the whole world was watching. But let's go back to the beginning, so you understand how a woman who dedicated her entire life to family reached this breaking point. I was only 18 when I got pregnant with Edward. His father, Robert, disappeared in the second month of pregnancy, leaving only a cold letter saying he wasn't ready to be a father. My parents, rigid people from a small town in the countryside, kicked me out of the house. "You made your bed, now lie in it," were my father's last words before closing the door in my face. I arrived in Chicago with a small suitcase, $300 in my pocket, and a baby growing inside me. I got a tiny room in a boarding house in the suburbs, worked as a cleaner during the day, and washed clothes at dawn to earn some extra change. My hands became raw from soap and cold water, but every pain was worth it when I felt Edward moving in my belly. When he was born, in a public maternity ward, I held him in my arms and promised he would never go through what I went through, that he would have love, care, opportunities, that I would be both father and mother if necessary. And that's exactly what I did for the next 25 years of my life. Edward was a sweet, affectionate child. He called me my queen and said that when he grew up he would buy a big house for us to live together forever. I worked double shifts to pay for private school, the brand name clothes his classmates wore, English and computer courses. I gave up everything, boyfriends, my own dreams, moments of rest. My life revolved entirely around him. When Edward entered business school, which I paid for by cleaning corporate bathrooms at dawn for 4 years, he met Claire, a girl from a wealthy family, entrepreneur parents, who looked at me as if I were an unwanted stain on the perfect life she was building with my son. At first, Edward still defended me. When Claire made acid comments about my simple house or my old-fashioned ways, he said I was the most important woman in his life. But gradually, the visits decreased. The phone calls became more spaced out. And when they got married, I found myself gradually being pushed out of the life of the man I had raised. Claire had a mother, Constance, who was even worse. A bitter woman who had divorced 3 times and who saw me as competition for her son-in-law's attention. She whispered poison in her daughter's ear about clingy mothers-in-law and how important it was for young couples to have independence from parents. Their strategies were subtle but devastating. They organized family dinners and forgot to invite me. They planned trips and outings always when Edward had promised to visit me. Claire constantly complained of headaches, anxiety attacks, and 1,000 other problems whenever I was present, forcing Edward to choose between comforting me or taking care of his wife. And my son, the boy I raised to be good and loving, began choosing Claire. Always Claire. I tried to be understanding. After all, he was building his own family. It was natural that he needed space. But the distance became a chasm. The calls decreased to once a week, then every 2 weeks, then only on my birthday and Mother's Day. When Claire got pregnant, I thought things would change. That finally I would be a grandmother, that I would have my place in the family again. But she lost the baby in the 5th month, and somehow the blame also fell on me. Your mother stresses Claire too much, Edward told me on the phone. I think it's better if you give us some time. Give us some time. As if a mother's love were something that could be paused, filed away, resumed when convenient. The years passed. Edward prospered at the company where he worked, bought a beautiful house, traveled the world with Claire. I continued in my simple little house in the suburbs, living on a social security check of minimum wage, watching life pass by through the window. My friends talked about grandchildren, Sunday lunches, affectionate sons-in-law. I smiled and lied, making up stories about how Edward was busy but attentive. The truth is that he had become a polite stranger. He called on my birthday, sent a card at Christmas, transferred extra money when I needed some more expensive medicine. But there was no more warmth, closeness, that genuine love that existed when he was a child. I had been replaced by the new family, and my role had been reduced to an occasional social obligation. When I started feeling chest pains 3 months ago, I tried to endure them alone. After all, who would I complain to? But when I fainted at the grocery store, the neighbors took me to the hospital. The test showed I needed to stay for observation, undergo some procedures, nothing too serious according to the doctors. I called Edward, nervous, apologizing for bothering him. Of course, Mom, I'll be there. Claire is a bit stressed with work, but I'll figure it out. His voice sounded distant, mechanical, but I clung to that promise like a shipwrecked person clings to a piece of wood. I spent the first night in the hospital, imagining how good it would be to have my son there, talking to me, making me laugh like old times. I fixed my hair, asked the nurse to help me put on my nicest nightgown. I wanted to look presentable when he arrived. It was the next day that I received that message. Mom, we had to travel last minute. A well-deserved rest with Claire and her mother. The doctor said everything's fine, right? When we get back, we'll see each other. Take care. War none. I read those words once, twice, 10 times. A well-deserved rest with Claire and her mother. Constance, the mother-in-law he had barely known for 5 years, deserved a vacation paid for by him. I, who had sacrificed decades of my life, who slept on the floor to buy his bed, who worked until my bones ached to pay for his education, didn't deserve even a visit to the hospital. The emotional heart is more powerful than any muscle in the human body, and mine broke at that moment with real palpable physical pain that made me double over on the hospital bed. It was in the following days, alone with my thoughts, that I met Camila, a 28-year-old nurse, curly hair always pulled back in a bun, brown eyes full of genuine empathy. At first she just did her job, checked my pressure, brought medicines, asked how I was. But she was the one who noticed something was wrong beyond my medical condition. Mrs. Helen, are you okay? She asked on the 3rd night, when she found me crying quietly, trying to muffle the sound with the pillow. And then, for the first time in years, I spoke. I told her about Edward, about how I had been the only family he knew for so many years, how I had worked 3 jobs so he could have a better life, how I had given up my own dreams. I wanted to be a teacher, you know, so he could achieve his. Camila listened without judgment, without empty advice about how children need to fly the nest. She just held my hand and said, "You deserved better, Mrs. Helen." In those simple words there was more understanding and affection than I had received from my own family in recent years. It was Camila who suggested I try to reconnect with the outside world. She showed me how to better use my phone, how to see photos and videos on the internet. There are a lot of good people in the world, Mrs. Helen. People who would know how to value you. I doubted it, but let her show me these social networks everyone talked about. On the 4th day of my hospitalization, my condition worsened. What seemed like a simple cardiac issue proved more complex. I would need a small surgery, some procedures that required someone to sign responsibility terms. The hospital tried to contact Edward dozens of times. Calls, messages, emails, total silence. That's when Camila did something that changed everything. Without warning me, she took that photo. I was holding Edward's childhood portrait, the only photo I always carried in my wallet, looking out the window with an expression she later told me contained all the sadness in the world. Mrs. Helen, she told me afterwards, I'm going to post this. There are a lot of people who need to see what's happening. You don't deserve to go through this alone. I protested, said I didn't want to expose myself, that Edward would be angry. But Camila, with that sweet determination some angels have, had already decided. Sometimes we need to be seen to be valued, Mrs. Helen. And sometimes the people who should value us need to feel shame to wake up. The post went live on a Thursday afternoon. In 2 hours, there were 500 likes. In 6 hours, 5,000. The next day, when I woke up, Camila was beside my bed with sparkling eyes. Mrs. Helen, you've become a phenomenon. Everyone's talking about your story. There are people wanting to visit, send gifts, adopt you as a surrogate grandmother. I didn't really understand what was happening. How could a story of abandonment and sadness generate so much interest? But then they started arriving. First, a woman my age, Mrs. Margaret, who said she had gone through something similar with her own daughter. Then a young man who had recently lost his grandmother, and said I reminded him of her. An entire family that brought flowers, and said their own mothers were seeing my story and crying. Messages started pouring in. People telling their own experiences with family abandonment. Children who recognized their own mistakes upon seeing my photo. Mothers who identified with my pain. Grandchildren who said they would start calling their grandmothers more. In a matter of days, I had involuntarily become the voice of thousands of forgotten elderly people throughout America. People called me the Internet Grandma, and my story was being shared on news sites, radio programs, Facebook pages with millions of followers. What touched me most deeply were the reports of people who had changed their behavior after seeing my photo. Children who called mothers they hadn't spoken to in months. Grandchildren who scheduled visits with abandoned grandparents. A silent chain of reconciliation and awareness that had started with my public humiliation. Camila showed me the comments, and I read each one with a mixture of emotion and disbelief. This photo made me realize I'm doing the same thing to my mother that they did to Mrs. Helen. I'm going to visit my grandmother tomorrow. Thank you for opening my eyes. What a heartless son. This lady deserves all the love in the world. And then in the middle of all that avalanche of affection from strangers, came what I least expected. News that my story had reached Edward. Someone had tagged him on social media. Friends, co-workers, acquaintances, everyone had seen the photo of his mother abandoned in the hospital, viral on the internet. If you have been following stories like this, and identifying with accounts of overcoming and female strength, leave your like and subscribe to continue receiving narratives that touch the heart and inspire real transformations in so many people's lives. Camila told me, with a mischievous smile, that Edward had called the hospital in panic, not worried about me, but desperate about the negative repercussion the story could have on his personal and professional image. He's coming back from vacation in a rush, she told me. He said it's all a misunderstanding, and that he's always been a present son. At that moment, I felt something I didn't expect. It was no longer the anxious expectation of reuniting with my son. It was a strange calm, a clarity that allowed me to see the entire situation from a completely new perspective. I had spent decades waiting for crumbs of attention from Edward, settling for the minimum, justifying every absence, every neglect. But now, faced with recognition and genuine affection from thousands of strangers, I finally understood my true value. When Edward finally appeared at the hospital, on the 6th day of my hospitalization, the scene was exactly as Camila had predicted. He arrived tanned, with an annoyed expression, visibly embarrassed. The room was full of flowers, letters, gifts from people who didn't even know me personally, but who had connected with my pain in a way that he, my own son, never could. "What is all this?" was the first thing he said, looking around with disapproval. "It's love, Edward," I replied calmly. "It's the love you forgot to give." He tried to explain himself, talk about the trip that was already paid for, about how Claire was going through a difficult time and needed emotional support, about how I was dramatizing the situation, and it wasn't that serious according to the doctors he had consulted by phone. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't interested in his justifications. I wasn't willing to ease his guilty conscience or minimize my own pain so he would feel better. "Edward," I said, looking directly into his eyes, "I spent 72 years of my life thinking I didn't deserve more than the crumbs of affection you gave me. I worked 3 shifts to pay for your school, slept on the floor to buy your bed, gave up my dreams to fulfill yours. And when I needed you most, when I was scared and alone in a hospital, you chose to take your mother-in-law to the beach. He tried to interrupt me, but I raised my hand. No, let me finish. For the first time in my life, let me finish speaking. My voice was firm, serene, but loaded with decades of unspoken words. These people you see here, these flowers, these letters, are from people who don't know me personally, but who understand a mother's value, who recognize the sacrifice, dedication, unconditional love a woman can give. You, who should know this better than anyone, were the only one who didn't see it. The silence in the room was deafening. Edward looked at the floor, hands in his pockets, clearly uncomfortable. Claire was at the door, looking like she wanted to be anywhere but there. And you know what the saddest part is, son? I continued. It's not even the abandonment itself. It's realizing that I myself convinced myself I deserved so little. That I normalized the neglect. That I justified each of your absences as if it were my fault for demanding too much or being too needy. I made myself small, so you would feel comfortable ignoring me. It was at that moment that Camila entered the room, bringing another flood of letters and messages. She looked at Edward, with a coldness I had never seen in her. You must be Edward, she said, without extending her hand. I'm Nurse Camila. I've been taking care of your mother all these days, alone. The word alone hung in the air, like a silent accusation. Your mother is one of the sweetest and most resilient people I've ever met. Camila continued. She told me how she raised you alone, how she sacrificed everything for your education and well-being. It's impressive how someone who received so much love can give so little in return. Edward turned red, alternating between anger and embarrassment. Look here, young lady. You don't know our story. You don't know. I do know. Camila interrupted him. I know your mother spent 6 days in a hospital without receiving a single visit from you. I know she needed procedures that required a responsible person's signature, and you were unreachable on a beach. I know she cried every night holding a childhood photo of you, wondering where she had gone wrong in raising you to deserve such neglect. At that moment, something definitively changed inside me. It wasn't anger or hurt. It was a deep liberation, as if decades of invisible chains had broken all at once. I finally saw the situation with total clarity. Edward, I said, getting up from the bed with difficulty but determination. I want you to know that I forgive you. I forgive because holding resentment would only hurt me more. But forgiving doesn't mean accepting, and I won't accept crumbs anymore. Mom, you don't need to be so dramatic. Dramatic. I almost smiled. Son, I spent my entire life being understanding, flexible, not dramatic. I stayed quiet when you forgot my birthday, stayed quiet when you stopped visiting me, stayed quiet when you excluded me from family events, stayed quiet when you always chose Claire and her family. Now, at 72 years old, I discovered I have a voice. And this voice has value. Camila approached and stood beside me, a silent but powerful support. From today on, things will be different, I continued. I won't call every week begging for your attention anymore. I won't diminish myself so you feel less guilty anymore. I won't accept being treated like an occasional social obligation anymore. So what do you want? Edward asked, with a challenging tone that didn't hide his desperation. I want you to leave and think carefully about the kind of son you want to be from now on. If you want to have a mother in your life, a mother who loves you unconditionally, who roots for you, who has stories to tell, and wisdom to share, you know where to find me. But it will be on my terms, with the respect I deserve. No half words, no empty promises, no treating me like a favor you're doing. And if I don't want to? The question came out before he could control himself, revealing a cruelty I always knew existed but had never faced directly. The answer came out of my mouth with a serenity that surprised me. Then you'll live with that choice for the rest of your life, and you'll discover, probably too late, that children can be replaced, girlfriends can be exchanged, friends can disappear. But mothers like me, who love unconditionally, and who sacrificed everything for a child, those don't appear twice in anyone's life. The silence that followed was different from all others. It wasn't uncomfortable or tense. It was the silence of a truth finally being told, of a dynamic being definitively broken. Claire, who had remained at the door the whole time, pulled Edward by the arm. Let's go, honey. Your mother is clearly altered because of the medications and all this unnecessary exposure. But Edward didn't move immediately. For the first time since he had arrived, he looked me in the eyes for real. And for a second, just 1 second, I saw the 5-year-old boy who called me queen. The boy who promised to buy a big house for both of us. Mom, he began, his voice choked. I will always love you, Edward.
That will never change. But I won't humiliate myself for that love anymore. You know where to find me when you decide you want to have a real mother in your life." They left in silence. There were no hugs, dramatic apologies, or cinematic reconciliations. Just the door closing and me, Camila, and a room full of flowers from people who understood my value before even meeting me. Camila helped me lie down again. "How do you feel, Mrs. Helen?" I thought for a moment. How did I feel? Sad, relieved, angry? Actually, I felt whole, complete. For the first time in decades, I felt like Helen Santos Oliveira, not just Edward's mother. "I feel free," I replied. "I feel seen, valued, respected, and that's priceless." In the following days, visits continued. People who had connected with my story came to meet me, exchange experiences, share their own accounts of family overcoming. I received invitations to participate in television programs, to give interviews about elderly abandonment, to become a kind of spokesperson for this cause I didn't even know existed. But most importantly, I discovered a community of people who understood my journey, women who had sacrificed everything for their children, and found themselves forgotten in old age. Elderly people who had found family in unexpected places, people who had learned to value themselves regardless of others' recognition. When I was discharged from the hospital a week later, I didn't go home alone. Mrs. Margaret, the lady who had been one of the first to visit me, suggested that we, orphan grandmothers, as she jokingly said, form our own support group. Not a group of lamentations, but of empowerment. We started meeting every week. We shared stories, made plans, supported each other mutually. I discovered there were other women like me, who had dedicated their lives to their children, and found themselves abandoned when they built their own families. But I also discovered that this didn't define our value as people. We founded what we call the Queen's Network, a group of mature women who had decided to value themselves regardless of family recognition. We organized outings, courses, cultural activities. We supported each other in difficult moments, and celebrated each other's victories. Camila became a true friend, almost like the daughter I never had. She helped me better understand social media, respond to the hundreds of messages I continued receiving. My story had touched people throughout the United States, and many of them shared their own accounts of family transformation. 3 months after hospital discharge, I received a phone call. It was Edward. His voice was different, more humble, hesitant. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the hospital. I think you were right about many things." I no longer felt that desperate anxiety of other times. I didn't cling to his words as if they were a lifeline. I just listened, serene. "I would like to talk to you, in person, if you want to." "Edward," I replied calmly, "you're always welcome in my house. But come because you want to be here, not because you feel obligated or pressured by public opinion. Come if you're willing to get to know who I really am, not just the mother you would like me to be." The conversation was brief, but there was a different energy in it. Not the old dynamic of supplication and concession, but a conversation between two adults, establishing new parameters for a relationship. Edward came to visit me the following week. He arrived alone. Claire had preferred to give space for our conversation. We talked for hours. He apologized to me, not just with courtesy words, but genuinely, recognizing behavior patterns he had developed over the years. He told me that several friends and coworkers had confronted him about my story, that he had begun to realize how he had gradually excluded me from his life, that he had become someone he himself didn't respect when he looked in the mirror. "Mom, I don't know if I can be the son you deserve, but I want to try, really." I listened to him without drama, without immediate concessions. I had learned that words are just the beginning. What matters are consistent actions over time. "Edward, I don't need the perfect son. I never needed one. I just need honesty, respect and recognition, that I also have value as a person, not just as your mother." We established new agreements, regular visits, but without the old pressure. Real conversations, not just superficial reports of how we were doing. And mainly, I wouldn't give up my own life, my own plans and friendships to be available whenever he decided to show up. The process was slow, gradual. There were relapses, moments when he returned to old patterns. But now I had clarity and firmness to establish boundaries. And more importantly, I had a full life that didn't depend exclusively on his attention. Claire continued to be a problem. She never accepted my transformation well, as she called it. For her, I should continue being the submissive and discreet mother-in-law, who didn't bother anyone. But Edward began to realize he needed to make more mature choices about how to balance family relationships. I won't lie and say everything was resolved perfectly. Family relationships are complex, and decades of dysfunctional patterns don't dissolve overnight. But something fundamental had changed. I had recovered my dignity, my voice, my self-worth. The Queen's network grew. Today we are more than 50 women, of various ages, who support each other mutually in self-worth journeys. Some regained family respect. Others built effective families with people they found along the way. All learned it's worth fighting for one's own dignity. Camila told me, months later, that my photo continued being shared and commented on. That I had become an involuntary symbol of silent resistance, of dignity in adversity. You changed the lives of thousands of people, Mrs. Helen. Mothers who were allowing themselves to be disrespected woke up. Children who were neglecting their parents became aware. You did much more than you imagine. Today when I look back, I see that moment of maximum humiliation. My viral photo, exposed in my vulnerability, was actually the moment of greatest power in my life. Not the power to control others or force love, but the power to value myself regardless of external recognition. I learned that dignity isn't something others give us or take away. It's something we cultivate within ourselves, every day, through small choices about how we treat ourselves and how we allow others to treat us. I learned that self-love isn't selfishness, it's responsibility. How can I teach others to value me if I don't value myself? Edward and I have a different relationship today, more honest and respectful. It's not the idealized relationship I dreamed of having with my son, but it's real. He visits me regularly, calls without me having to beg, includes me in some family events. Claire still wrinkles her nose, but she learned I won't disappear anymore for her convenience. And perhaps this is the most important lesson I learned, that the most revolutionary, transformative, powerful love we can experience is self-love. Because when we learn to truly love ourselves, we stop accepting crumbs. We begin to attract and cultivate relationships based on mutual respect. We become living examples that it's possible to maintain dignity even in the most difficult circumstances. Today when I look at that photo that went viral, I no longer see humiliation. I see the exact moment when a woman decided she deserved better. I see the instant when decades of silence transformed into the most powerful scream of my life. The silent scream of recovered dignity. The Helen who is here today, writing this story, is no longer that fragmented woman who begged for love. I'm a whole, complete woman who learned that true power isn't in controlling others, but in respecting yourself. Who learned that sometimes we need to break completely to rebuild ourselves stronger. And if my story can inspire a single woman to value herself more, a single mother to establish healthy boundaries, a single child to recognize the value of the one who gave them life, then all the pain was worth it. Because in the end, I discovered that the silence that screams loudest isn't the silence of resignation, it's the silence of dignity. It's the silence of someone who knows their worth and no longer needs to beg for recognition. It's the silence of someone who learned that being loved for who we are is infinitely better than being tolerated for what we pretend to be. This is my story, the story of a woman who discovered, at 72 years old, that it's never too late to rise up, that it's never too late to shine, that it's never too late to scream, even in silence, that we are worthy of love, respect, and consideration, and that sometimes the whole world needs to see our pain so we can finally see our own value.